Welcome back to Dating Intentionally. I'm Talia. I'm sharing no nonsense advice for navigating dating and relationships with confidence and ease, whether you've been dating for a while or you're just getting started. I believe dating can be fun. And I also believe dating can be really hard to navigate by yourself, which is why today we are getting into 4 dating dilemmas submitted by you, the listeners. So thank you so much for submitting them. If you want to submit your dating dilemma to have me answer on a podcast or on YouTube, there is a form linked below in the show notes. You can do it anonymously, and just know that when you share what you're going through, it actually helps other people who are probably going through the same thing, and it makes them feel less alone because, hey, we're all in this together, and what you're going through is normal, and I'm here to hopefully offer some clarity and some direction on what to do next. As always, I love hearing from you. So if you have any thoughts you want to share, any hot takes, any advice, you can comment below if you are listening on Spotify or watching on YouTube. You can also DM me on Instagram at dating.intentionally. My DMs are open for you. You can reach out anytime with questions. I love hearing from you. All right, let's get right into it. This first one is about making sense of someone's crappy behavior and what to do moving forward. Some of these dilemmas today are a little bit longer, so stay with me on this. This is a good one, and there's a lot to learn here. I, 39 female, have always struggled with my relationships with men, primarily choosing emotionally unavailable partners and having short lived relationships. I mean, who hasn't? Most recently, I reconnected with my very first Tinder date from 11 years ago, a 43-year-old man, by looking him up on Instagram. His profile was public, so I watched his stories, and later that day, he reached out to me via DM and sent a friend request. I guess he followed her. It was really positive, and he said he remembered me from our first date and that he wasn't sure what happened between us. We went on 2 great dates, and at the time I was 28, he was 32, and had 2 young children. And I had never dated a single parent before, and I wasn't sure if I wanted that dynamic. I suggested we revisit and go on another sushi date. He agreed and confirmed that I was single, and I confirmed that he was too. We then started watching each other's Instagram stories, with him frequently liking mine. I was hoping he would ask me out, so I reached out to him and he was out of town with his kids. Another week passed and still there were no date plans, so I reached out again. I said, "I'm surprised you haven't asked me out yet, or were you planning on just continuing to like my stories?" He responded positively and he said he had his younger child for the weekend, but promised he would ask me out and confirmed he still had my number. So he also sent me his. He said he would reach out the next day, so I expected to hear from him and then heard nothing for a week besides continued story viewing and liking my stories. 1 week went by and I was feeling anxious and bummed, so I reached out again. I said, "Hey, I was expecting to hear from you to make plans. Did something come up?" And he said, "Nothing came up. Work became severely busy." And then he listed a bunch of work related things that happened, including a sprained ankle. I felt he wasn't addressing my concern and following through, so I said, "Sounds like a lot of things came up, but yeah, I expected you'd keep your word or at least say something." And I didn't think that was anything harsh or crazy to say, but then he responded with, "Whoa, sorry if I offended you in any type of way. I didn't realize we had made hard plans, which I will always keep. Nothing came up in any type of way. It's been a wild week at work. I apologize if I offended you. I think that was a little much for me." And then he proceeded to hide his stories from me and went back into the DM conversation to unsend the message where he sent me his number. Fearing I totally blew it, I tried damage control by sending a message saying I was just excited to have a date. He read it and didn't respond, and that was now a little over 2 weeks ago. Since then, he's continued to view my Instagram stories and is often the first one to view. His stories continue to be hidden. My dilemma is there anything I can do? Is there hope for the situation? Should I do nothing and continue to give space? Is he just a jerk? I'm worried I let my dating anxiety get the best of me and was too demanding or clingy. I'm proud of myself for calling out his behavior, but maybe I could have chosen my words better. I really wanted to connect and feel we didn't have a chance. Sorry this was so long, but I appreciate any feedback. If anything, it feels cathartic just writing all this out. Whew, there's a lot to unpack here. And I just want to say, I mean, I relate to the situation. I'm sure listeners, you can relate to the situation when you're chatting with someone and you're trying to get a date on the books and they're watching your stories, but they're not responding. I mean, there's a lot of confusing things happening here. And I feel you. It is so frustrating. All you wanted was a sushi date. It didn't seem like that much of an ask. So, to answer your question up front, no, there is nothing to do here other than letting it go and removing this man from your following so that he can no longer see what you're doing or blocking him. Up to you. I would say just make it so that he doesn't have access to your stories anymore. Just let it go. So let's break this down, right? You connected with someone on Instagram that you previously went out with 11 years ago twice and it didn't go anywhere. He also had two young kids and, they're now more grown up. You offered a sushi date. Sounds like he never stepped in to schedule it properly, despite, saying that he was into it and would reach out. You called him out. He said that it was a bit much for him and then he hid his stories from you. You tried to salvage it, but he left you on red. So, what happened here? Basically, I think that after a date was mentioned and then you follow up once and nothing happens, it's better to just let it go. And I know that's not what you want to hear. I know that's really tough to kind of stomach sometimes because you're showing up what you think is the right way. You're like, I want a date. You are expressing interest. They're meeting you with the energy of like, yeah, I'll check my schedule. Yeah, I'll see what's going on. Let me see when I'm free. I'll reach out. And they don't follow through. So, of course, you think, okay, I'm just going to nudge it, like bump it up in their inbox. Just be like, hey, your number, we're planning a date. And it seems like you went through the cycle a few times. I would say that if someone says they're going to follow up, your job isn't to remind them to follow up. Your job is to see whether or not they actually follow through on that. So I think in the future, don't even come back to them being like, hey, I thought we were having a date, Also, I want to say a clear sign that someone has no intention of going out with you is when they throw a bunch of excuses at you. Like when he mentioned he was busy with work, kids, a sprained ankle, and other things. Like that's someone who has no intention of seeing you but doesn't want to be seen as the bad guy. It's like when they overdo it on the excuses, that's a sign they're just not interested. And while those all may be real things that happen to them and that they're dealing with, they're not really getting to the truth, which is that they're not interested. And speaking of interest, someone watching your stories every day is not a sign of romantic interest. It's a sign that the Instagram algorithm is pushing your stories to the top of their queue and they're just mindlessly tapping through like everyone else. If you're listening and you're on social media, don't read into someone viewing and liking your story. What we need to be reading into is whether or not they follow through on what they say they're going to do. In this case, he didn't. I'm glad you called him out, and it sucks when someone doesn't follow through, but in the future, know that when someone says, I'm going to reach out, and they don't, that is not a sign for you to keep trying. It's a sign they lack follow through and probably wouldn't be a good partner anyway. In the future, I want you to be turned off by this behavior. So I don't think you missed out on this connection at all. You deserve someone who keeps their word and makes plans because I'm sure you'd be lovely to get a sushi date with. By the way, if you want to learn more about signs someone is interested in you or ways you can show interest in someone that are appropriate in early dating, I will link my episode on this below in the show notes. I hope this helps. Thanks again for submitting. And if you are listening to this, you can reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions. And I want to hear from you listening. If you have thoughts on this, if this has happened to you, if you have a different approach, drop a comment on Spotify or YouTube or shoot me a DM on Instagram at dating.intentionally. Okay, this next one is kind of similar in that it's about being the pursuer as a woman. So let's take a look. I'm a 32-year-old female who enjoys being pursued, but I've come to realize that even after giving it some time, I rarely find myself truly interested in the guy, and it feels like I'm settling. Recently, I've started taking the lead in choosing who I want to pursue, and your advice has been incredibly helpful. Thanks. However, in the past, when I've made the choice to pursue someone, they've often interpreted it as me being, quote, easy when I've taken the lead in pursuing someone. I've found that they often get an ego boost and assume that I will be easy to sleep around with, even though we are looking for something serious and long term. What can I do to avoid this dynamic and make sure my intentions are respected? How can I communicate my desire for a committed relationship without being misinterpreted or taken advantage of? Oof, so I totally get this dilemma and I want to get into the meat of it. But first, there's something at the top of your message that I noticed and I want to just touch on. So you said you like being pursued and realize that you're not able to feel interested in a guy pursuing you and you feel like you're settling and you prefer to be the one pursuing. And if you've been listening to this show for a while, you know that I'm all about knowing what you want and aligning your actions and words around that. But I also think that if you're truly ready to be in a healthy, secure relationship, you're going to see being pursued as a turn on as well, rather than a turn off or like you're settling. Obviously, we don't have the full story or your dating history. And yes, of course, you're not going to be interested in every person who's interested in you. And I'm not saying to force it, but I just want to call it out just in case this is a pattern for you, because it could be possible that you're stuck in a belief that you need to earn someone else's affection and attention and interest, and when it's just given to you, you feel that leaning into it would be settling when really it's not. So I just want to put that out there. I don't know if that resonates with you, but just in case. Anyway, let's put that aside and get to the meat of what's going on here. So, you mentioned that you notice a pattern where when you pursue a guy, they make it sexual or show that they're only really looking to hook up, and you want to avoid this dynamic. You said you want to communicate your desire for a committed relationship without being misinterpreted or taken advantage of. My initial thought here is that it's time to practice setting and enforcing boundaries. Like, there are people out there who don't have great intentions, who do lie about wanting a relationship just to get in bed with you and stuff like that. And that's one of the most frustrating parts of the dating pool today. But you don't have to allow this or go along with it. You have the ability to say no, to not bring people home, to not bring up sex early on, to shut down conversations that get sexual, and to walk away from people whose actions don't align with them saying they want a relationship. You get to decide when you feel comfortable having sex with someone in the dating process. And I'm not going to tell you when that time should be or when is best for you. But just remember that you control the pace. And if that doesn't work for someone else, then they're just not a match. So that's how you avoid being taken advantage of. Pay attention to actions over words, set boundaries, stick to them, and walk away when you need to. And make sure that you're reflecting on whether or not you want to be physically intimate with someone and that you're not just feeling pressured into it or feel like you have to at this stage. Like, really reflect on if that's the best move for you at that point. In terms of being misinterpreted, I guess I need to know how you're communicating what you want and when. My recommendation generally is to bring up dating goals somewhere between the end of a first date and the third date. You really don't want to let it go longer than that before getting on the same page or figuring out, if you want completely different things. In terms of how, I always advise people dating to either bring up what they want to accomplish in their future, which could include starting a family or cohabitating with someone or traveling the world with a romantic partner, whatever it is for you, or asking the question, what are you hoping to get out of dating right now? And discussing that. When you clearly say, I'm dating to get into a long term relationship and ultimately I see myself getting married, that's pretty clear. That's pretty hard to misinterpret. You need to be able to stand on that and own what you want. Because if you try to play it cool, which I don't think it sounds like you are, but you're more likely to be misinterpreted. And honestly, I don't think people are necessarily misinterpreting you. I think there's just a fundamental misalignment. Like, they're looking for a hookup and you're not. So here's my advice. One, practice setting boundaries and walking away if the person you're dating can't respect them. Two, if you think you need to, work on how you phrase what you want and adjust when you're bringing it up. Maybe you need to bring it up sooner. And three, reflect on whether or not you're turned off by someone pursuing you because you feel you need to earn someone's affection and you don't deserve it by just being yourself. And four, keep going. If you follow this advice, you'll be able to get to the no faster. And remember that someone else's desire to date casually and hook up really has nothing to do with you or your self worth. I hope this helps. Thanks again for writing in. And if you're listening, I want to hear from you. What do you make of this? Do you relate to this? Are you on the other side of this? Let me know. You can drop a comment on Spotify or on YouTube, or you can DM me on Instagram. Okay, we're going to switch gears here and talk about something that isn't as fun to talk about, but is still very important, and that is dating and politics. It's 2025. It's impossible to ignore this volatile political and social climate we're in right now, and I know it's affecting dating culture more than ever. So here we go. I, 24 female, am a left leaning moderate when it comes to politics, and I'm currently dating someone, 24 male, who is a Trump supporter. We've been dating for 2 months, and he doesn't talk much about politics, but I'm having a hard time figuring out where and how to draw my line on what's important to me politically. In every other facet, we match. I have hesitations on how to approach delving into this. Thank you. I'm sure everyone listening can relate. I mean, it is tough right now to find someone who aligns politically with you right now. It is just a really tough climate out there. And I'm not about demonizing people, though, as a liberal woman, my personal view is that it would be hard to be in a relationship with someone who actively supports Trump right now. For you, though, and for anyone else watching, if you're dating, you need to dive into this topic. And this advice I'm going to share applies to the other sticky topics like money and religion, topics that are less fun to talk about if you don't align. And for this specific situation, you said he doesn't talk about politics much. Well, that doesn't mean you can't voice your concern, ask him questions, and hear his point of view to get a better understanding about his exact stance on the political and social issues you really care about. And yes, the work you can do on your own before you have this conversation or after is like what really matters to you and where would you draw the line. But I get why it would be hard for you to do that before having this conversation because you need to know what lines to draw. So, how do you approach these conversations? And yes, it can be a series of conversations. It's not going to be just one. You don't have to figure it out in one go. I don't recommend just having like one sit down conversation and calling it a day. I think it's better to kind of spread it out. And I recommend saying, like, hey, this has been on my mind. I think you're amazing, but the politics thing is where I have doubts. Can I share my thoughts with you? And if he says yes, that's great. He's at least open to hearing you out and you can at least start to have like a civil conversation. And ideally, this can lead to a discussion where he's open to and you can ask each other questions and, kind of really dive in there. If he says no, well, I'd ask for clarity on why first, but that is deal breaker territory to me. You can't move forward and discover solutions or alignment with someone who won't even talk about these things. That is the bare minimum. So, first, get to can we even talk about this? Can we even get into this conversation? Or does he avoid this? If the answer is no and you actually can get into the conversation, great, that's a good sign, then you can figure it out. Though I'm going to just tell you, you have permission to walk away from a relationship if you don't align politically and it really matters to you, which I hope it does. You are allowed to do that. It is totally okay. And I just want to call out that we did see this happen on Love is Blind season 8 on Netflix. I'm going to say something that is a spoiler, so if you haven't watched the show and you want to, definitely fast forward like right now because I'm going to say something. We saw two couples get to the end, to the altar, where they were not aligned politically. And we saw two women who were liberal walk away from men who weren't at the altar because they weren't aligned on their political values. And that's the reality of, I think, dating right now. It's really tough, but we need to be really honest with ourselves. And personally, like, again, this is just me. I don't know, maybe you relate to this too. It would be really hard for me to be in a relationship with someone where we're not aligned on some of these core values that are tied to politics right now, because I don't think I would be able to have respect for them. And if that's you, just know that it's okay to walk away, even if you think you're a great match in other ways. I think long term, this does really affect how you would navigate a lot of things in your relationship. And if this isn't you, like, it's also okay to accept these differences and keep going if you want to. Again, this is my personal point of view. So take it with a grain of salt. I want you to think about what resonates with you and move forward with that. And if this doesn't resonate, that's okay. I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've been through this, if you've been experiencing this. You can drop a comment on Spotify or on YouTube or DM me on Instagram. Okay, this last one is about moving on from someone that broke up with you like a year ago and you're still stuck on it. Here we go. I, 34 female, was completely blindsided by my ex, 30 male, in a breakup 8 months ago. We had a 1 year relationship. The relationship was truly amazing. I've never been so happy in my life. Out of nowhere, he broke up with me. This came after some huge milestones, like spending a weekend at his family cabin, in which his mom had a long conversation with me about how she's never seen her son so happy and that he's never felt comfortable bringing someone to their cabin before. He said it was amazing and everything was amazing, but he, quote, just had doubts that we were not each other's true match. I was completely shocked. There were absolutely zero signs. We had been talking about moving in together the day before. This is where, quote, knowing all the things comes into play. I know that you should never try to convince someone to stay with you or try to change them. I know that even though I personally thought the relationship was amazing and perfect, clearly there was a huge lack of communication and he didn't even have the emotional capacity to talk about his doubts with me before just straight up breaking up with me. So clearly that means the relationship wasn't as perfect as I thought. So I stuck to no contact. I went through a breakup course. I've been in therapy. I've worked on filling my own cup with finding new hobbies and meeting new people. And I've refrained from reaching out to him for answers despite desperately wanting them. I know that you have to give yourself closure by healing and moving on rather than seeking answers from the person who hurt you. I know all these things, but I can't get there deep down. I started dating again this past month, and I've been on dates with multiple guys, and I've been seeing a truly great guy for 6 dates now who I know prior to my ex I would have been all in on. Every time I see him, I have a great time and I want to see him again. But deep down, there's a piece of me that's just stuck because I don't feel the same way about him as I did my ex. And I'm not excited. And I just want my ex back, even though I know it's over and I've been doing the work to get over him. And then I want to reach out to him to get answers, even though I know I shouldn't. So then I circle back to, okay, maybe I should just go back to no dating again for a while, but I don't think that will help me move on either. And at the end of the day, I feel like I know all the information, but I can't get to the doing and believing and actually being in that mindset part. Any advice? Wow, this is tough. And I think when you're saying being there, I think you mean moved on or like over it. And I just want to say, I really relate to this. I mean, it's so tough when you're blindsided and you don't see it coming at all. And then I can't believe like the day before you were talking moving in together and the next day he was out. I mean, that's tough. And I'm glad that you are investing so much time, energy, and money into your healing. It bums me out to hear that you feel like it's not working, right? I think sometimes we expect to be farther along than we are at a certain point. You're like, oh, it's 8 months. I've done all this stuff. Like, why aren't I over it? And it's like, I think it's important to reflect on how far you've already come, even though you're not where you want to be yet. So just give yourself a minute to like pat yourself on the back for that. And like really doing all that work to move on, I think is probably done more than you think. So, my advice for you, obviously, you've tried a lot of things. And personally, I think dating is a good method, honestly, not to find a relationship, but to create more emotional distance and give yourself a chance to experience new connections, even if you're not quite ready to commit. I mean, of course, you don't feel the way you felt about your ex with these new guys because one, you dated your ex for like a year. So you're not going to feel that way about the new people. And two, every connection is going to be different. And I think that's not a bad thing. It's just like the facts. It's a different person. It's going to be a different dynamic. You're going to connect on different things. You're going to have a different energy between you two. So it's okay. It's good, in fact, that you don't feel about them the way you felt about your ex. And just note, like every relationship is unique. And maybe you're not ready for a relationship right now, but I do encourage you to be open to this when you are. Like I know you loved your ex and you were happy, but just imagine for a second that you might be happier with the next person you end up being with for a long time. I also want to direct your attention towards the opportunity you have here, right? You are now single. You've come out of this relationship, and even though it ended and you didn't want it to, you now have the chance to find someone who actually can communicate. Like, I encourage you to focus on finding someone and dating people who have the ability to express themselves. I'm wondering, from based on what you wrote, did you and your ex ever have conflict in the year that you dated? And if the answer is no, that's not a good thing. I'm not saying it's healthy to have big blowout fights and that's what to look for. But if you're not having any conflict, that means someone isn't communicating. And it's normal and healthy to address things you disagree on. It's normal to have miscommunications and that cause conflict in relationships. Your interpretation of what happened might be true, right? He got spooked. You had the move in conversation and he was like, oh shit, like this is real. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I gotta leave. And that sucks because I feel like if he was more mature, if he was a little bit more okay with his emotions and able to express himself, maybe he would have been like, hey, you know what? Actually, that scared me. Let's take a beat and put moving in on the back burner until like I come to terms with this. But that wasn't him. So next time along the way, you might look for signals that the person you're dating both desires what you desire and is ready for that level of commitment down the line. You might approach getting into and navigating a relationship differently this time around, which could look like having more direct and straightforward conversations about your future and what you want. Getting blindsided sucks. I wish there was a way to make sure it never happens again, but unfortunately, it's just not fully in our control. But I want you to keep taking care of yourself and be patient because I know it's cliche, but time truly does heal. For what it's worth, I kept thinking about my ex regularly until I got engaged to my husband. And that was like 3 years after our breakup. Part of the reason you're stuck is literally the neural pathways that get created and the thought patterns that exist from your relationship because you spent a good chunk of your life thinking about him. Like your brain is just kind of has these grooves that are very well worn, and you have to work on overriding them and overwriting them and creating new neural pathways so that you don't automatically think about him every time something like you watch a show or go somewhere in your town or like go to a restaurant that you went to. You know what I mean? Like it takes time for your brain to rewire itself. Something my therapist told me to do, like when I would just, again, automatically think of my ex when I wasn't trying to, is cutting the thread. So that means if you're on YouTube, you can see this. It's like literally taking your hand in the shape of a scissor and like snapping the thread, just cut it, snipping that thread away. It's like, you know what? I'm going to stop thinking about this. I'm going to cut the thread, let it go. I'm putting my hand back next to my head and like pretending to cut a thread. So that is something that I used to do whenever I was thinking about my ex and didn't want to. I'd cut the thread and move on and think about something else. We can control our thoughts. It takes practice though. So I hope this helps. I hope that you feel validated because what you're going through is tough and you are doing a lot. And I want you to really pay attention to how far you've come. And I do encourage you to keep making new connections and dating and being open to a different flavor, you know? And also just embracing the idea that the next relationship could be better and probably will be. And that's exciting. All right. So that's all I have for you today. Again, if you have any thoughts on this, please reach out on Instagram at dating.intentionally. Drop a comment if you're listening on Spotify or watching on YouTube. I love hearing from you. And thanks again for listening. Thanks for trusting me. I would love it if you share this episode with someone who is dating right now and might need a little confidence boost or some tough love. And if any of my episodes have helped you in your journey, you can help me and other daters find the show by rating on Apple, Spotify, or following wherever you're listening. It all helps. Once again, I'm Talia. This has been Dating Intentionally, and I'll see you next time.